I believe Mary Ellen and I will tag team it here, so.
Just whenever y'all ready, I think we've got everybody we're gonna have.
She's got the presenter.
Awesome. Well, we are going to present the fiscal year 22 budget and just kind of taking timeline. You know that earlier this month we took time with the board with a work session around budget and you know, talked a good bit about areas that were self-funded and revenue in the last meeting specifically, and revenue projections. So tonight is the entire general purpose operating that we will share and update you on. So take you back to a year ago, you know, as we were looking through general purpose budget season, you know, just a very difficult budget and unknowns that, you know, really existed in regards to revenue and what was to be anticipated, obviously dealing with, you know, the pandemic and the nature of it. And so trying to determine how to operate. The board made, you know, really strategic decisions to ensure that we were positioned to be able to withstand any real challenges that the pandemic, outside of the normal operational challenges, fiscal challenges, that the budget, the cycle would present. As we look at budgets, we always start with, you know, the strategic focus of the district and the strategic plan that the board has set and the goals and priorities that are, you know, really important to each of you. I should go back, and that you've set for us, I should go back and mention, you know, as you look at this timeline, and we'll come back and do this at the end as well, but you'll get it tonight. We've got a couple of, you know, a couple and a half, almost 3 weeks of time with it, the entire summary plus the line item detail. We'll work closely with Dr. Highlander and you all collectively, individually, to have conversations about specific areas and items. And then, you know, other things as we look forward. Additionally, the 3-year budget projection, we'll actually bring that on April the 12th. And so looking at the 3-year projection, we'll also have in that April meeting areas that may have been requested but are unfunded, we're not able to fund through this budget cycle. And many of those are through a couple of budget cycles at this point, just because of what revenue is. And we all know that a budget is, you know, a series of decisions that exist. And our strategic plan really guides us and drives us towards where we really desire to head as a district, and obviously the acceleration of student achievement always being at the core of that. Really important to us to always get community feedback around what's important. We had several, and we shared this, I think, in the first budget session. We had several virtual this year, obviously because of the nature of COVID. We had several virtual meetings, and then also had done a survey where we were able to get really good feedback around what was important in talking to the budget. Mary Ellen's going to jump into the budget area. Before she does, just some high-level areas that I think are really important to elevate. This is a balanced budget, and always important to us to be as fiscally responsible as we possibly can. And so this budget does do that. This budget shows a commitment to, obviously, our continued commitment to employees and our teachers and leaders and support staff. You know, it's really important, we feel, to you know, we are, you know, 78% people. And so when we have people, it's important for us to invest in those people, and our teachers and leaders and staff do an amazing job. It also is a continued commitment to, you know, our students in the areas that you have elevated as a board as strategic focus areas and our strategic priorities. You know, as a result of some of the relief funding that exists, we will be able to braid some funds to, you know, address some strategic areas. But in all honesty, this budget is very straightforward. It is a very straightforward general purpose budget. Additional revenue just covers what we're doing for employees and contractual obligations, and that's what this budget really is. But again, we're very pleased in that, you know, when we start to look and thinking back a year ago from a revenue construct, as we've shared, We have not had that major nosedive or any nosedive really that many had and would have anticipated, and rightfully so. And you all as a board thinking ahead anticipated. We are, as everything goes, you do want to always be prepared for challenging days, and so it's been really important for us as we think through this budget to operate, really in that way. Another commitment that's there in employees, and we'll get a little more granular with this, but also our classified employees want to move that starting pay. I think even Keith was here and Penny a couple years ago. We started with the goal of trying to get to $15 an hour. Last year we got to 12. This year we're working to get to 13 is what's in this budget. And there's a commitment to our veteran educators that come in from county in uncapping experience. We want to recruit and retain not just new teachers. We want them as well, but we also want to entice veteran teachers from neighboring districts and from other places to come and be a part of Hamilton County Schools. And so, we had some limitations of one of the things that we really talked about in conferencing. So that's really high level. Mary Ellen will elevate the document and we'll go from there.
Okay, so you all should have a big binder in front of you. We're going to walk through the document. Okay, so if you'll get your binder out, we're going to kind of walk through the documents. And the first section is there's a letter and kind of some high-level details, some of the things that Dr. Johnson's already covered. If you'll starting on page 5, again, I think one of the big items that you'll see when we brought the revenue budget, and we'll move into some detail as we go, but we brought the revenue budget to you. We did not include any increase for BEP because we weren't sure what they were going to do on the hold harmless. And things are moving along in the legislature, so we have brought in additional revenue from what we presented for an increase of $4.1 million in BEP funding. So that's instead of keeping it flat that we had.
Yeah, I just put a fire point on that. That legislation is passed through committee and anticipated going to the floor maybe as soon as this week. And so, as we shared, most of us have experienced decline in student enrollment. Thought it was really important, as most school systems across the state. I found out on Thursday maybe that all except I want to say 9 districts. I thought it was 16 or 17, but it was all but 9, and 2 of those 9 had a bump. Of the 147 had a bump specifically because of their virtual programming. So they were, sounds like maybe smaller school systems where there wasn't virtual option in the district, and they were able to offer it and got some growth from that. But only 9 districts experienced a stay flat or an increase, and so the other 138 had some type of decline, some fairly significant. I've shared with you all that from a proportional standpoint, we've been in a pretty good spot in that regard, but obviously this hold harmless piece, if it passes, helps us from the standpoint of our strategic priorities.
Again, all of this that we're presenting ties back to our strategic plan, and keeping that in mind, both, that's not, just a one-year budget, it's thinking now and into the future. And so I get a key, again, is braiding with the ESSER funds and looking at how we can, utilize those to help us with strategic priorities. And again, looking at how do we work that with the fund balance? And so, because we can't just take ESSER funds into fund balance, so looking at how we can shift some items from GP into ESSER, which frees up some funds that we could put in fund balance to help us kind of protect against potential economic decline in the future. So I think it's kind of, thinking, kind of balancing short-term with long-term, and making sure, thinking ahead, but making sure that we continue to make investments today to support the students.
Just one point of clarity there, Mary Ellen,
Yep.
one point to add to what you're sharing. One thing for consideration as we talk through it, and what we tried to give you here, you've got it all, and it's, we'll put it up on the web, it's all there, as well as the ESSER 2 document, which you got in the last meeting, included that as a part of this. Two separate things. Our general purpose budget is obviously what's coming for, will be coming for consideration of approval But also, I think it's important to make sure we're really clear that in many areas in our general purpose, we haven't been able to make investments beyond what's already been there from the strategic, within the strategic priorities. So within our general purpose budget, you'll see as Marilyn goes through it that, you know, there's not a lot of areas where we've been able to use general purpose dollars for things that, you know, may have been desires. But we are able to use ESSER in some kind of ways. The one thing I will share is anything from a general purpose construct that you push into ESSER, you know, all those things have runways. And so with ESSER 2, it's 2023. With ESSER 3, it's 2024. There is a example or exemplar of the board having done that. Nikhil was reminded about student fees. When we first went back and took student fees and said, okay, we're going to, in all accounts, eliminate those and give schools an allocation. That first year we funded it with $1 million out of our fund balance, and then we worked it into our GP budget in the go forward. But I just want to flag that that's something that, you know, we've got to continue to keep top of mind, because these funds only have so many, have so long to be able to be expended.
Okay. So on to page 9, again, highlighting some of the community priorities that came out from the sessions that we've had. And again, we've kept those in mind, but as we've talked about, a lot of those will be looked at through the ESSER funding as the initial place to kind of bridge those until, and again, some of them, there's some ramped up investment that will be short-term, one-time type things, and then there'll be certain things that will be ongoing. And, you know, as I look at, I know y'all are learning my kind of budget approach, you know, it is looking at things and making sure when we do take on a commitment, we understand the long-term approach to that. You know, sometimes there's things that you have to, if a software implementation, you might have an investment, a higher investment when you start to do the implementation cost, and then but making sure you've got the maintenance cost in your base funding. So understanding those different levers and how they work. So on page 10, again, focused on that we are presenting a balanced budget. So you'll see the revenues, and as I mentioned, we added 4.1 of BEP funding in those numbers. So if you'll remember, the amended budget that we have so far after we did the amendments in February was $434 million. So it's really flat with what we've amended. But what we've done is in the amended budget for 21, there's one-time funds in there. So we utilized fund balance for some of those items of the textbooks and I'm trying to think what some of the technology that we used some one time, the disinfecting contract, and then we switched that to ESSER. So again, we've swapped those one-time funds for base funding and from increased property tax of 2.5%, the sales tax, which we'd already recognized some of that in the February amendment, and with a little bit of adjustment. So that's in that $434 million. And then we show the focus areas of where those funds are going. And again, the primary part is to accelerating student achievement, since that's most directly focused to our primary mission. But we know that these other areas are important, but our future-ready students, which we've heard a lot about in some recent meetings. And then we'll go into some more detail of what some of these items are. And again, once you have to have time to digest all these, and we can discuss further of any questions you have in those individual meetings. But if you have anything that, while we're going through it, let me know.
Can I say?
Yep.
Ms. Houghton and Dr. Towns worked through some of this with me, and I very much appreciate that. But one thing we're looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, about $142 million in ESSER money. Is that over a 3 to 4 year period? And so one thing I expressed, and they relieved a lot of my fears on this, is that we have temporary money we don't want to spend on permanent expenditures that we're going to have to recur. And one thing they're looking at, we can spend up to about, I may be jumping the gun on this, about 50% of this we're allowed to spend on capital expenditures. Am I correct on that, Dr. Towns? Ballpark, I mean, not exactly.
Yeah, so from a restriction construct, the only restriction is what, 20% for learning acceleration. There's another 10% that has to be, those are restricted, right? So as you know, with ESSER 2, we stepped into doing some facility work, and really what we did to the point was pivoted some things that we had in capital maintenance over to projects that we were looking at. With ESSER 3, we're absolutely going to look at being as aggressive with our capital, with our facility, needs from the standpoint of things that are connected to allowable areas within ESSER. And so really thinking about ventilation and thinking about increasing space. And it's not that broad, just increasing space, but, creating more opportunity for distancing, which is a major focus within ESSER. Where those opportunities present themselves, we absolutely look to capitalize. So up to 50%, I think it's still to be determined as we go.
We talked about moving the alternative school to Hillcrest, and the $2 million it would take for that would come out of ESSER money, correct?
Yes.
Which to me is very positive use of the money that we can get that done. Anyway, one concern I had was that the temporary money would not be put onto something that we would be permanently required to pay for it on an annual basis, and they've assured me that that is not the plan to do that. We can even take some of the money that would have gone into that and go back into fund balance. So I felt better after listening to that.
So I just want to make sure there's a point of clarity, because I don't want anybody to be to misunderstand. Like, we can't take any ESSER money. I know what you're saying, Dr. Hanlon, but I want to make sure the public understands. We can't take ESSER money and put it in fund balance. What we can do is look at areas within our general purpose budget where we can, really leverage that resource to create some room and opportunity for us, and we'll do that as much as we possibly can. I also want to be clear with this, y'all, and I don't want to talk, or I'm going to speak right to it. There are 44,500 children in our district today that deserve for us to do everything we can to move student achievement forward. And so as much as we try to do those things, I am absolutely married to moving children forward, right? So I think as a board, and you all have been as well, so as we think about, the allocation of these funds, even within our general purpose budget, we really need to think from the lens of how do we move our district forward for the long haul. And some of that involves, if there were ever a season to take risk, this is it. And so I want us to think comprehensively about what we do, and really try to build on the work that we've been able to do collectively together. So.
And I think just following on that, so there may be things that would be base items, and the goal would be, again, looking at our longer term plan, is that the growth money in the future would allow that to filter into that. So again, making sure we don't overcommit though. So making sure when we look at our future years, the expected growth would cover any of those ones, the things that are base items. So things that we feel like we need to invest now, to, especially around student achievement, like we need to ramp this up now, but knowing the growth will cover that as we move forward.
And I just want to put a finer point on this. We're talking about ESSER right now. They're two separate budgets, but they're intertwined from the standpoint of our strategic direction. So as we talk through it and about it, we didn't want to necessarily, and we don't know where ESSER 3 is still to come. We didn't want to necessarily deal with them separate and apart, right? We've got this one-time funding to try to move some things forward. And so we just thought it was important to see kind of the whole picture as much as we could paint it to where we think things are.
Okay. So on page 11, so kind of back focus on the GP portion. Again, you can see kind of where the funds are going from the revenues, and again, the majority, unlike some districts we talked about that with Dr. Highlander too, there are some districts where the majority of their funding is coming from the BEP, but ours mostly is, majority is coming from local revenues. But again, the state revenues are very important to our budget, and getting that hold harmless is key to the budget that we're proposing. We do want to highlight a few of the key investments, and again, I think Dr. Johnson alluded to a few of those. So again, you're familiar with the staffing model that we implemented 2 years ago, and have been working through that. And when we ran the model based on the enrollments, if you just follow the model, it would have told us to decrease 51 positions in elementary and middle school. Now we're hoping with when the school year comes back in, a lot of the kindergartners and the other students will return, but so we didn't want to take that drastic an action. But basically, that's, about $3 million of funding that's covering those positions.
Can I ask
Yep.
a quick question
Yeah.
on that? And we may have already addressed it. Sorry about that. But do we have any idea on the timeline for a decision about holding districts harmless?
Yeah, hopefully as soon as this week. I think regardless, our commitment has been, we want to be as least disruptive to the schools as we possibly can. So our commitment regardless was to work to try to figure out ways to support these roles, even if we needed to pull these into, ESSER resources, because, the schools, I mean, it's been a year. And so, fortunately, it looks pretty positive in regards to the hold harmless. And so it's passed out of committee, and I want to say it goes to the full floor this week, so we could know something as soon as, the next week, definitely too.
So, and again, I'm not sure how much of the public is listening right now, but I think it's really important that people understand that this is an important issue, that whatever they can do to contact their representatives is important for us, because we have to abide by what they decide, what this is good news.
Thank you.
And the driver for that, I'm talking more on this budget than I really plan to. I'm being in trouble with Mary Ellen off the bat. So to put a finer point, like we're down roughly 900 students, okay? But about 700 of them are kindergartners. And so the two areas where we see the biggest, and let me give you a proportional example. I think we were talking today, and Nikhil, we were saying, I think Metro Memphis was down like 9,000.
8 to 10,000, both of them.
Yeah, I've talked to some neighboring districts that are much smaller than we are, and 400 to 600 in districts that are a third of our size. So from a proportional standpoint, we've been pretty good. Everybody I've talked to has been very similar to us, in that kindergarten is where there's been, and that's nationally as well, there's been the steepest decline. The second area is seniors, and so schools are working hard to try to say, hey, get back in here, what's going on? But those are the two areas where the biggest challenge has existed in regards to the pandemic across the country.
I hope y'all haven't spent a whole lot of time trying to figure out the problem. Because I think we know what the big part of the problem is.
And then while we mentioned that there were decreases in elementary and middle, high school actually had an increased enrollment. So using the staffing model, that adds 8 positions to the high schools to help cover the increased enrollment there. That's really, besides a few contractual, those are the two, big things on the changes related to enrollment. And then on page 12, a few other things. So as again, in the amended budget, we did reinstated the fiscal year 21 step increase and a 1% raise anticipating the BEP increase. So this proposal is bringing forth proposed adding the fiscal year 22 step, an additional 1%, so do a 2% total on top of the 2 steps. And then, as we mentioned, for our classified staff, raising the entry level, making sure the minimum is at $13, and then eliminating the 15-year external cap. And I think on the $13 per hour, that affects about 300 employees. And then nothing on additional investment in engaged community, but continuing the efforts that we've made there. And then on the efficient, effective operations, and we've talked about that. I think this was brought up last year, and then got put aside with the pandemic. And I think we talked when we talked at the individual meetings back in February, but we're going to bring forth at the April meeting the agreement with Enterprise. And a reminder, the county has been doing it for several years, already been very pleased with it, and so we've talked to them several times about it. So we've got a proposal in here to move, I think it's about 16 or 17 vehicles onto the fleet program, which will save us in maintenance and fuel costs, have more reliability and safety. So we really think that's a good move. And then, we only have to commit to 1 year if those I think it's like a 3-year lease for most of them. And if we think it's not working, we don't have to continue to put more into it. And we're also, part of that will be a maintenance agreement, so it'll really help us get the best pricing on vehicles and maintenance. It says, we won't go through this in detail, but the next two pages, yeah, have kind of for each of the community priorities, the ones that we mentioned already that do have additional investments, and then ones that we're looking at to have ESSER investments. And we'll get a little bit more detail as we carry on with that. And then we'll do a little bit more detail, but real quickly on page 14, you can see the other funds summary. We talked about that in a previous meeting where we presented the details, and we'll go back through that. And then in the actual approved budget for 22, all we'll be bringing forward related to ESSER will be what we expect to carry forward for the ESSER one. We expect most of that to be spent by the end of the year and encumbered, but we think there'll be about $250,000 to carry forward. When we come for the April meeting, we'll actually bring the original amendment. It's an amendment from as far as the overall budget, but the first initial budget for ESSER 2, that'll bring that forward, and it shows up as 1-year funding, and then after we close out the year, then we'll reappropriate any carry forward. So then that would then go into the fiscal year 22 budget once we know that number. So right now, we're not approving any actual funds in the ESSER 2.0 or the 3.0. Again, we'll talk a little bit, we got some more detail on ESSER and further in. In this next few pages, again, just focus on the board's strategic priorities and continue to keep those in front of mind. So I think y'all are really familiar with that. I know we do a lot of updates on that, so we won't dig in that, but there's a lot of good reading there talking about the things that we've done. Page 18, some highlights. I think a lot of these were covered in the state of the system address. Just remind you about the priority-based budgeting. And again, that's, when I interviewed, that was a big thing that I really caught my attention because it ties into my way of thinking, so that, Brett and I clicked on really looking at not just kind of incremental funding, not always just doing what you've been doing, but really looking at the dollars and where they're going and making sure they're making the biggest impact. And just because you've always spent the money here doesn't mean that's where you should continue to do that. So we'll continue to dig into that and looking at which levers we need to pull to make the biggest impact for our students. And as we also mentioned, so the April 12th meeting will bring forward the 3-year strategic plan. So building on, what we're planning for fiscal year 22 and then on to 2 years in the future. Again, looking at how we braid in the ESSER funding, I think that's key. Just looking at how we utilize that, and then really kind of thinking about then what's next. Really kind of, not just even just a 3-year, but be thinking forward for the years in the future. Because we know at some point there may be an economic, downturn, and I'm definitely more on the conservative side of my budgeting. So I want to always be thinking about that. But you can't just save money, because just if you're not investing, again, we see what that's happened to some of our facilities. So you have to make sure you continue to make wise investments. Page 21. Again, the highlight that you've seen in a previous meeting on the community priorities and the different areas. And then on 22, again, you've seen this again, this is our highlights of the revenues and the focus area, and we'll dig into a little bit more. You'll see commentary on each of the strategic areas and the actual dollar amounts, and highlighting again which of the investments that we're continuing and the new investments that we've talked about with the positions.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
So our local tax revenue represents 56% of our total revenue for the general fund budget versus 42% from state revenue. And the number that I've been using over the last year or so, like when we were looking at the potential of vouchers in Hamilton County, that we were really, the state was doing 51% or 52% and we were doing 48%, I thought. But this has our responsibility increased as Hamilton County?
It's because our revenue, because the sales tax revenue increased, so it changes.
Okay, so our
the share, but
BEP
not
formula share has remained the same?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yep. Yeah, so that gives us additional funding to put into our
This has
portion.
been about the ratio for 10, 20 years. I mean, it's been about the same ratio ever since,
Yeah.
for years.
And there's no suggestion. I went looking just to see if there was any information about it changing, and
Okay.
yeah. And two, I'll just mention too, that state education revenue also includes the BEP, but it also includes the pre-K and some other, and there's more detail, but I'll show you where that is, so you can see
Okay.
the other grants that are included there.
Thank you.
Mhm. So again, I think most of this you're familiar with, but I do want to call your attention to page 29 on the mandated costs. So this is, not part of our strategic priorities, it's part of one of those things that we have to spend. So it's got the trustee fees, city and stormwater fees, the debt service, and then the big one that I want to call your attention to is the charter schools. So there's a large increase this year, and part of it is you approved the Montessori Elementary at Highland Park, so the enrollment for that school coming online in the fall. And then Chattanooga Preparatory School is launching their 9th grade class. So those two changes, we're actually seeing an enrollment about 20% increase. So that'll be a budgetary commitment for the funding that comes through for those students that go to those charter schools. And, potential that could maybe pull some students in that have left. But there is a chance that they could be, students that are current schools that will shift to those schools. So again, we try to take a conservative approach in looking at that increase.
The Ivy Academy was gonna start in elementary school.
So there's two, Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, there's two that'll be coming, are they coming in April? Are they coming this
Yeah.
month coming up?
At the April board meeting, we're sending you a recommendation for those children.
Okay, Ivy, and who's the other one?
It's Ivy and then the Chattanooga Charter School of Excellence for a high school.
For high school?
Yeah, so those would be in the 23 budget, and so when we do our
Yeah.
strategic, we would have that.
Does that basically have a zero sum, or when it comes to the students and to our finances, as students from
no.
our schools go there, or does it affect our bottom line?
So it ends up being kind of like the BP formula, in that the kids don't come. So generally what happens, to Mary Ellen's point, is that it's not an outpouring per se of new students from outside the district. Generally it's students within the district. Generally, all these are generally, those students don't come from one specific school, right? So as a result of that, you don't move, you don't have any teacher loss per se. You're still funding the head count. So because they come from across the district, generally it's not something that necessarily is a zero-sum game. It costs us. and
Kind of
so-
like magnet schools. Same issue, they come from all over the county, so it's like cost
But
more
they're
money.
not coming from private schools, or they're not coming from,
They
they're
could.
coming from our
They
own
could.
schools.
They could.
They
Yeah,
could.
they could come from anywhere, I know that, but yeah, but it's not working. We're still paying the same amount of teachers. We're allocating some of the funds that we receive to support the.
But we receive funding because of their, and it's also, don't we get money because of them coming into the system. And that takes, tell me if I'm wrong, Dr. Johnson, 3 to 5% of our budgeted monies go to the charter schools, right?
That number is exactly correct, but it's not so much that we receive an increase in students. Like our total enrollment usually looks about the same.
It's a per pupil expenditure.
Yeah, yeah.
basically.
No, yeah, I just was trying to see if it affects, but I got it. Thank you.
And that's been historical. I mean, we made this note. That could change, right? Montessori is something that a lot of people are attracted to, right? It could be that the Montessori school attracts new students who have not come to the district before. But we're saying historically, it's exactly what you think. It's typically transfers between our schools and the charter schools, which means there's no net gain in the district pot. We then just have to make the transfers and understand that the money follows the child appropriately. But to Mary Ellen's point, we just plan for it. And we're saying to you all that you'll be seeing us increase these mandated costs, which means somewhere else we're balancing the budget.
And it does factor into the staffing model too. So, I mean, if there's a decrease, that flows through the staffing model.
Hey, Mary Ellen, what's
Yep.
the, I know it's probably deep in one of these line items, what's the stormwater fee come out to? Because I know they increased, I don't know if we fall into that, I know we have an agreement with them.
That number, I do not know off the top of my head. Let me see. Yeah.
It's about 100 and,
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite a bit, isn't it? Like 160, 100,
I thought it was way
We'll
more than
find
that.
is it that much? I can't remember.
475,000.
What?
475,000.
475. Wow, okay. All these people in the city want to help education, that would help a lot, wouldn't it? Hear how they're gonna help education, seriously?
Drop that stormwater fee.
That's right. Like a hot potato.
So then continuing on to 30 through, let's see what that page that goes through. 337, that's more line item detail on the strategic priorities and where the head count is and the buckets of costs. And again, at the very back, there's all the details, line item details lining up to this. So it's all consistent. We're just kind of working our way through more detail in here. If there's anything you want, to call attention to. But again, it's very, just adding those eight teachers and then the compensation, which the compensation all, those step and the 1% all rolls onto the great teachers and leaders line, and then it'll get redistributed once it actually flows through the accounts. So we put it in kind of one lump account and then distribute it with an amendment during the year. And then I wanted to go a little bit more detail on the other funds. So capital maintenance, we're keeping at the $3 million. And it does have the staff, I think it's about 12, a head count of 12. But we'll be looking at braiding in some additional funding with ESSER to look at some of our top priority projects.
A couple things just to put these out there as far as 3 strategic plan that we think about. Number one, we want to work towards bringing that head count. Justin's getting excited on the inside, but we want to work towards bringing that head count into general purpose, right? We can't do it this year, but we really need to bring that head count into general purpose, because what it'll allow us to do is to, and it's been this way for quite some time, and we tried to look at it about 2 years ago. It may have even been last year. We tried to look at it, and then we just kept, budget and just different, the pandemic, et cetera, just created a challenge. So that's number one. But number two, normally, just I talked about this the other day. Normally, you get a list of projects that we're going to do within the funds that are left. We've been pretty aggressive on projects, and it really probably warrants some live here. We're working on a Justin Witt request and Justin Robertson, but probably in maybe May or June, we need to bring you an update on the projects that have been done or that are in progress. But normally you get an individual project layout. We wanted to wait till we look at ESSER 3, because we're doing some in ESSER 2. We're going to, obviously, as mentioned, do some more in ESSER 3, see where that leaves us. And so we're trying to be really thoughtful about our approach there. So I just wanted to flag that, because normally that's a little bit different. ESSER's created a little bit different dynamic in regards to how we look at capital maintenance.
Okay. School nutrition. So, and when I just want to just kind of reinforce this, the $13 number for staff is just GP staff, not school nutrition. So we're looking at what they can do within their budget to look at that, see if there's maybe some ways ESSER can help with that possibly. So looking at how we can do that. We have had some challenges because there's not as many students been paying into the meal program. So looking at some ways to help them, support their revenue with some additional efforts on getting students into the meal program.
Are you looking at me, Mary Ellen?
No,
Are
you look like you had
No,
your finger on the button. And then there's, on page 39, the self-funded programs. We've highlighted the different programs and kind of what those dollars from outside go into, and whether they have head count or whether they're just other support costs. I do want to call your attention on page 40, a new line for the Hamilton County Schools Foundation. It's the second from the bottom. And so there's some different funds in there. One of the items is for the literacy officer for the K through 12 thing. I don't know if I know we're searching for it, I think, right now. So those funds have come in through the foundation, and I know they're continuing to look at fundraising and grants to help support various strategic efforts that we have.
If I could, may I make a brief comment? One of the self-funded, the Bible in the schools is totally self-funded, and it's a great program. Well, some people ask the question, we're teaching religion, we are not, it's Bible history. And they're very specific that it is non-religious instruction. But that's something that we get 26 teachers, if I'm correct in my number, that costs us nothing, and that lowers our average in every school. So I think it's a wonderful program for every school. And it is not, let me say, it's not religious, it is Bible history. And also the ROTC programs that is a very cost effective for us. And they're elective programs, both of them. But ROTC is, we only pay what the person would make on active duty. He or she gets their retirement money, and we only pay up to what they would have active duty. So we're probably paying for half of, or maybe less than half, probably a third of a teacher for every position we have. And it's just great, you know, and they offer so many things. I just can't say how positive I am about both those programs.
I have a question on that, not on the Bible in schools, but on the self-funded. Therapy and nursing is self-funded, and it says through the charges for services. What therapy are we charging for services?
Let me see if
And Dr. Drake can speak to this as well, but we do have third-party therapy and nursing services that we provide to supplement what we do with our internal staff. And so I don't know, Dr. Drake, if you want to speak to it.
Parents?
No.
Okay.
We take care of the cost. It's just running through our self-funded budget. We're not collecting fees from parents.
Okay, that was my question.
Yes, yeah.
And I'll say I met with Kathy Scott from the Bible in the schools this week, so I got a little history on how that works and everything behind that. So very supportive of, you know, our schools and what they're doing. So in the federal programs, and you'll see the number, this is slightly different from what I showed you the other day because we pulled the ESSER out to make it a separate so that the federal programs are really in line with what we've done in past years. So there's some good reading here. I'm learning a lot about all these different funds and how the title funds work. And how we're, you know, again, trying to stretch those dollars as much as we can to support those children. And again, that's a consistent funding from year to year, but we're just looking at how the best distribution of that. And then on 44, we'll dig in a little bit into the ESSER fund. Unless there's any questions on what we've talked to so far? Okay, so again, there's an overview of the ESSER funds. I think is some good reading, and at the top of page 45, you'll see the total allocation we got for ESSER 1, 2, and 3. Again, 1, we've essentially committed all those funds. We'll have a little bit. We think that'll be left over just at the end of the year that will probably be used for the rest of for summer. 2, we have that application in. Again, the allocation was about $40 million. Once we send the funds to the charter schools and take the indirects, it leaves about $36 million. And we're hoping any day to get that application approved. And you'll remember that you did get a detail, and it's in here again, showing where those funds have been in the budgeted to go. And then for ESSER 3, again, the charter schools and then the indirect, we're going to take a little bit more on indirect for that one. That should leave us about $77 million to put into investments through fiscal year 24. Again, as Dr. Highlander noted, we're looking at potential up to 50% in capital, and then we do have to put at least 20% into learning loss. And I think there's also some state funding for learning loss that we expect to come in to help us kind of supplement those programs.
So I want to give an additional perspective to the ESSER funds, and I don't even think it's like a disagreement, but I've often worked with nonprofits, and they receive grants that are temporary for a period of time, and they have to ramp up staff, and it is known that they're ramping it up for 2 to 3 years and then ramp it back down, and that's just a reality of that fund that comes through. The ESSER funds are intended to help us mitigate the losses that we received from COVID and to protect with some of the capital expenses. And I think I fully agree, it should never be something that's ongoing year after year, but it may be something we have to ramp up a certain level of staff or specific staff to meet a certain need in order to advance as far as we possibly can. And then unfortunately for that staff, they have to know from the beginning and I know this from the nonprofit, they know from the beginning, this is based on a grant and it'll go when the grant's done, so,
I think you raised a phenomenal point. I have had opportunity this year to talk pretty regularly to Chairman Pickey and White, who are on the Education Committee for the state legislature. And one of the comments that Chairman Pickey said was not just related to ESSER, just this whole period. In so many words, was we've got an opportunity to make it really tough 3 years down the road. In so many words, he was challenging us to make it tough on them, right? To use this additional funding and opportunity to move, you know, learning in the work so far forward that you come to them in 3 years and we say, these are the things that were done that made a meaningful difference. Now this funding is gone, you know, so to speak, and, you know, it made a meaningful difference. And so that was really a challenge, and I think the right way in large part to look at it. There's absolutely an opportunity to do a lot of one-time things which you need to take advantage of, but there's some opportunity to make some gains in areas that we have been focused on. And my hope is that, you know, in the areas we look at, that we can come back and say, this right here made such a difference that 3 years from now, like, we got to figure it out. You know, we've got to figure it out because we want to keep making that progress in that kind of way.
but if we can, I hope we do figure it out, but if we can't figure it out, I'm glad we moved our needle forward by that much in 3 years, right? So, and then I have a question on the fund balance, just for me, for my information, like nationally, on average, like what is a healthy percentage of a fund balance for the school district?
Well, there's two different ones, there's two different fund balances, so.
What I've read, and you all correct me with your expertise, is that we need to have a fund balance of more than 1 month's total expenses.
Which we do.
That's the
Yeah.
minimum. 1 month's total expenditures, that's everything it takes to run the system for 1 month. That's the minimum, that what I've read in my reading. You all can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, no correction. I'll say that the required minimum is 3%. Okay,
The
so-
state requirement.
So we, which is roughly
9%?
$12 million, is roughly what it would be. Now, you know,
Yeah,
very,
was just
very
curious. That's helpful.
Yeah.
I'll just say, Ms. Thurman might want to address it, but one time before I came on the board, the income did not come in as, you want to hit that, Rhonda?
Yeah, and we had to end up borrowing money from the county,
Yeah.
At a
and we
high
had
rate
to,
of interest.
and we had to pay interest on it, but it
Well,
was,
if it was before Dr. Highlander did,
yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit back there.
There's some history.
Yeah, but we swore we would never do that again, we haven't.
No, I agree.
We haven't, no, we've always had
I just didn't know what's helping, so thank you,
Yeah.
that's helpful. I didn't know if.
Even though there's some
9%
discrepancy
or-
about whether the state really mandates that much or not, is it really just a state law, or is that just a
Average.
suggestion or an average, or?
the 3%.
Because I know when we've gone to, I think it was
It's
when we were up
regs.
there
Yeah.
at, the TSBA, they weren't real, they didn't have a,
It's always been kind of hazy, but.
Yeah, they-
since
they
I've been
didn't
on
have-
the board,
I think it's kind of a
everybody we've had-
recommended thing, if.
It's in the
That's
budget.
a rule of thumb, is it,
Yeah.
Dr. Johnson?
I don't
they
think it's
give
a
us?
law, is it?
I don't believe it's actual law, is it?
The 3%, I think it's regs,
The
state board
3%
regs.
is.
It's regulated 3%?
Yeah, it's part of our, when we have to submit the budgets and E-plan, it's one of the checks that it goes
Checks in
through.
there, okay.
But
Along
that's
with
not
me.
nearly enough.
Yeah, that's not enough.
No.
Well,
Now-
but we're at 9%, so we're.
Yeah, we're
Right.
good.
Well,
We've
but
always-
I do want to say for context though, and I think Dr. Johnson and I both talked about this, when I was in Knox, we ran it at 3%. We hit the state mandate and that was it. We, invested back in the budget. So it is, we absolutely are here being very healthy with our fund balance, but we don't want to give the impression that every district, that's probably not statewide. A lot of people are probably running at 3%.
Is that for both fund balances, or just, is that both of them
We say both.
combined? Just-
That's just
Restricted
cheap.
and unrestricted, is that what you're talking about? Like
Yeah,
restricted,
restricted, yeah.
Yeah, it's combined fund balance of 3%. And so, one thing I will share, you know, that's another thing, like to Nikki's point, we ran a 3% fund balance. Now, one of the things we did, and this goes back to strategic priorities, was we put, like, I'll use a particular year, so let's say next year we knew we were gonna do technology for grade 6 through 12, and it was gonna be like 5.6 million. And so we earmarked, or restricted 5.6 million in the go forward, out of fund balance to say, here's where we're going. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, there's a lot of philosophical difference. We are in good position in regards to our fund balance situation, you know, going forward.
And when, in the April 12th meeting, we'll bring an updated projection for 21 and going forward, we think the fund balance will run. Because again, I mean, there's times when you need to utilize it to move forward, and then you kind of build it up again. And so I think looking at that, but keeping an eye on it is important.
And I promise, Mary Ellen, I don't usually talk as much with budget.
I've rubbed off on you, the excitement about
Man,
budgets.
Excitement about budget. Just taking a while. I do all the checkbooking at my house, so we're good. So, you may forget what I was gonna say, Mary Ellen. Oh, here's what I was gonna say. I just realized how much trouble I was in for saying that. So, on a serious note, what we have done, Marco, is we have become like more proactive with our budgeting. So, if you remember the last couple of years, like we like more real time budgeted. So said, okay, we can do this 2.5% a couple years ago. Okay, you know, we presented, hey, we can do this 1% and restore the step right now. So, you know, that positions you in a little more aggressive approach while you're still maintaining, you know, being conservative with the fund balance that's there. So it's a balance of both.
Okay, and like I said, we're showing again where those funding is and for 2.0, and on page 49, just some general ideas of where we're thinking 3.0, but they haven't opened that up yet, and we're still, you know, compiling information to look at, you know, the best place for those fundings. And again, it's going to be through 2024, so we're not going to blow it all the first year. It's, you know, thinking through it and thinking where we really, you know, make the strategic investments with that. But again, looking through our strategic areas. Again, looking on literacy, I think is, you know, probably one of our highest priorities, and English as a second language, continuing to look at growing leaders in the Grow Your Own program, and let's see, a couple other priorities. Again, some of those priorities, looking at HVAC projects and looking at some of those, you know, one thing I do want to mention with the custodial contract is looking at shifting the increase that's going to be, we'll put that into ESSER versus in the GP. So you won't see the custodial contract increase in the GP budget. We put that increase because it's related to the disinfecting. So the amount that we had covered this year in 21 with ESSER, then for 22 will also be in ESSER. And then eventually we'll look at, again, braiding that into our GP funding. So any questions? I know there's a lot of information. I know you're doing a lot of reading, and we'll have the individual meetings. I do want to, I think in the back of your packet, you'll see, let's see, the budget documents that we've provided. So you'll see the sheet with the table of contents for that, and then the papers for the detail on the revenues, and looking at the expenses in several different formats to kind of give you a different perspective on that. So I'll say preparing this, I've learned a lot, getting more familiar with the strategic plan and looking where the dollars go. See, I think it's the budget document. Oh, yes, sorry.
Real briefly, I think I understood you to say, and I believe this is correct, if this goes through the ESSER through 2024, but if it's designated, it can be completely spent through 2025 school year, is that right?
So I'll take that one. Angela Askins, Federal Programs Director. We're getting the details, but we think, Dr. Highlander, to your point, we have been told June 30th, 2024, but the fiscal year end for the federal government is September 30th, and typically we get to encumber through their fiscal year end plus, right? So we think that we're able to encumber through September 30th, which essentially gives us the rest of that school year, because we're on a different fiscal calendar than the federal government. We will get the details of those rules and regs, but that's just how it's worked
As we
in the
get
past.
closer to that time, you'll know. for
Absolutely,
sure.
we'll know for sure how much further we can go into the next school year with those dollars.
So it could be spread out a little further than.
Absolutely.
Right. Which is very good, right? So, because
I agree.
you know, I think one of the real challenges, if I'm just being completely transparent about the resources, is there's such a consolidated timeline to try to put together budget and ideas, and they're big, you know, pretty significant chunks of amount. Like I was talking to a superintendent last week, and he's in a smaller county, and he said, "Well, I'm getting $13 million," and in the scope of their budget, that's like, you know, 50% of their operating budget in a single year. And he said, you know, and so really thinking through it and being able to come back and amend, adjust, and tweak, you know, those opportunities will continue to exist in the days that lie ahead, because I think what has happened with the federal government, you know, a lot of times the legislation, it, like, all the details aren't there. They're not thinking about the, like, on the ground, what are the implications of it. It's like, let's get this money passed. Okay, great, the money's passed. We'll give them 30 days to put together a plan. Like, hang on one second. The last thing we want to do with the resources is to not make a meaningful impact. And so that's where we are. So we'll be able to, you know, tweak and, you know, amend and adjust based on, you know, a lever that we may see being pulled that's really making a real difference. And so it's good to have that flexibility to be able to do that. I think, to your point, Dr. Allen.
That reminded me of one point. I think something that we said, somebody said the other day that really kind of stuck with me is, you know, one of the items is this learning loss, but what we really want to see is learning acceleration. And that's something that's, you know, going to continue beyond this. And how do we look for those things that we can really invest to not only, you know, help the students catch up, but continue to exceed and surpass, and find those things that are really the things that make the impact that we can continue to invest in.
It occurs to me that the total ESSER funding is going to be quite similar to what the previously asked for budget addition would have been over 3 years from Hamilton County taxpayers. And that's a tremendous opportunity. And as much as you mentioned that the leadership at the state level is saying, make it hard on us to not have this money in the state funding 3 years from now or 2 years from now, for us to work the plan that you all had to achieve the strategic plan academic outcomes using this money and prove what's going to work for our students, not just 2023, but 25, 27, 29, 30. This is a tremendous opportunity that we're being given. I'm very excited to see what you all recommend for ESSER 3. And I noticed, Dr. Johnson, you used the word risk. This is a good time to take perhaps to make some bold choices with how we might invest this money, to do some things that might be a little bit different or new. You know, we've talked about student success planning being a place that you really would like to see additional investment because you see the potential there. The places that our community has raised an eyebrow and questioned, you know, is that really going to pay off for students, for us to be able to use these federal dollars to determine what that answer is? If it's a strong yes, that's going to be an interesting conversation with our community 2 and 3 years from now.
And so I think, Ms. Hill, and to the point of some of the conversation that's there, I think one of the bigger, broader conversations that's beginning to transpire that I think is really important, and we've got to think through internally, is how do we capture some of these things, what we want to make sure. When I say capture, actually from a research basis, to really understand the impact of what we're doing, that it's having. So the story tells itself, right?
Yeah.
And if you say student success plan, if it, you know, if we're looking at an investment there, we make the investment, we need to really understand the difference that it made. In a separate way, we're having this conversation about HCS Ed Connect, right? And so obviously a great opportunity for our community, let's really understand the impact that it's going to make. And so you can hear some of this conversation, I think, beginning to happen at the federal level around research and what that means and all that. So that's something that's there. I know the state just sent us maybe we were drafted to be a part of the continuous learning plan research that's being done to capture some of those powerful practices. And so that's a conversation that's beginning to bubble around areas of strategic focus. So,
And I will say this, our accountability and research director, Shannon Moody, we have had this conversation. You're right on. We have a great opportunity to really launch into what we called, when I was in Knox, our educational return on investment, and to set up these funds as projects so that we can do the action research, that we do the program evaluation, because at the end of this period, we do want to be able to say, what did we do? How did it move forward? You know, outcomes for kids, what results did we get? And so, to your point, it makes the case for future investment for things that we were able to bridge, right? That we piloted, that we did. So that will absolutely be a companion to this, and Shannon and her team are very excited about the opportunity to lean into that type of analysis.
my last ad, and then we're going to close it out on our end. So one other thing I'll share, it's not just from the standpoint of, I want to be clear, I know our community is very diverse. It's not just from the standpoint of asking for more. It's also from the standpoint of reallocation of, right? So there are some things maybe that we have been investing in that we're seeing better return on this, so let's make some intentional decisions about how we use the dollars that we have to make a difference. So it's a little bit of both and really in this season to move us forward.
I think in budgetarily, sometimes you've got to get it, I always kind of think that you need to get a new train up and running, and you get that running, and then you can switch from one track to the other and then do that. So there's some programs you can't just stop doing the old thing. But if you get the other one running up to speed next to it, then it makes the transition a lot easier, and that one goes away, and then you can redirect those dollars. So I think kind of during the research and the budget dollars and trying to keep those in line to see, well, yes, we can put this additional investment in something to kind of start it up and say, well, this really works, you know, phase the other thing out and keeping track of that.
You know, as a board, when we brought this strategic plan online, we did a lot of learning as a board about what was in that plan, getting a hold of it individually and getting excited about the goals that were in it. And I think this would be an excellent opportunity to do something similar, to look at this ESSER package 1, 2, and 3 with a big lens and make sure that we as a board really get it about what the vision is for where we want to be at the end of this spend calendar, and even to help Chattanooga, help Hamilton County dream a little bit about what this can do. I mean, this is a tremendous injection of possibility into our community. And if we know together what we're working toward, that could be pretty exciting for people. And as it is right now, you know, we're having to make these decisions so quickly, and you all are having to put in the application so fast that once the money's approved, to take a beat and know how all these learning acceleration line items are really going to matter, and how the learning loss mitigation line items are going to affect families and children. It just could be really awesome.
I think turning back to the take that clicker.
You're giving him the clicker?
I know.
We'll close out here. So just, you want to hit these two slides, Mariella?
Sure. Yep. So again, just when you dig into the details, you'll see, I think this is really important. 78% of our budget is for people, for salaries and benefits. And I think that is document, let's see, I think it's number 7, I believe. Get you right. Just want to get you to the right one when you can see that clearly. Thank you. Yep, budget document 9, the expenditure by type, so if you want to look at kind of where the funds in detail go. And again, a lot of those, most of that is out in the schools. And then this budget reconciliation, this is budget document 3, and this walks through, I just want to just real quickly, the 418.8, which was the original approved fiscal year 21, and then with the amendments that, I think the main one was in November, and then the one that we just approved in February brings us to the 434 million. Again, some one-time funds, the state program amendments, and then the ESSER, and shifting the custodial increase there. The first step, and then a 1%, and then a small increase that is true up at mid-year for the charter schools. But then we did plan to put 3.1 in the fund balancing. I'll bring that in April to show you where that goes in. So there was 2.8 originally in the budget, so plus the 3, so that's going to plan to put 5 million into fund balance from the fiscal year 21 budget. Then the first item is after the 434 million is annualizing the 1% increase, because we just did the 1% increase from January to July. And then we backed out the one-time items and then true up. So the state funding, there's some funding that we learned about during the year, and so we amend the state grant budgets, and then we reverse them back out to what we planned. There's several state grants that are phasing out, I think it was one of the state priority grants that's phasing out. But we do think there'll be some additional ones coming on, but they haven't been approved yet. And then you'll see the 3.7 for the fiscal year 22 step, about 3 million for another 1% salary increase. The charter schools increase about the 2.5 million. Some contractual increases that we've covered, and those 8 additional teachers. And then you'll see at the bottom, the textbook and technology are the items that we've flagged to shift out of the GP budget into the ESSER budget, those specific items. But again, as we work through the ESSER to see if there's other items that make sense, we'll keep continuing to get into that. So basically, it's flat with what we'd amended. So they're both 434 million. I think it's about a $300,000 difference. But that kind of just walks you through from the expenditure side, how we got from what you've got at the amended for this year to what we're proposing for fiscal year 22.
These 8 additional teachers, who are they, where are they, what are they?
We'll get you the line, you may not off the top of your head, Kenny,
They're high school.
we can get you exactly where they are, the schools. It's just generally.
Because of increased enrollment?
Because it's.
No.
Yes,
In high school, yes.
in high school, yeah, so,
Well, I thought seniors were down.
yeah, so it's.
Is that not high school?
It is, but yes, but no, yes, but no. So, so we'll I've got a document somewhere I'll find and send to you all, that's got kind of a by grade band breakdown. I forget where I had it, but I'll find it for y'all and bring it out. What you'll see is that in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, they've all grown.
And our 8th grade is much larger than our 12th, is that?
It is correct.
It's always
large,
somewhat, but.
It is correct.
What I've read is that we've got a whole lot more 8th graders than normal than we had when these seniors were 8th graders.
Yep.
One of these seniors are moving on, and so it's the next group that's coming up.
And I think to the point,
I asked the same question.
kindergarten's going to be pretty significant. So what we tried to do was, to the point of this hold harmless.
Well, because I started to say, if we're down that much in kindergarten, we're gonna be losing some kindergarten teachers. Of course, you're gonna hold them harmless, but still, we can't hold them harmless forever if they
Well,
come back.
next year, we're gonna
Well, yeah,
need
they're all
some
coming
more
in next year.
kindergarten
We
teachers.
should have a ton of
Probably.
kindergarten next year.
700 more.
So you're gonna have this kind of, probably, this first grade that's gonna be smaller.
Mhm.
Second grade's gonna get probably pretty normal, but it'll be off probably a little bit next year with kindergarten, and so.
But somewhere there's gonna be somebody that's down if we've lost that many in kindergarten. Then first grade's gonna be down, so.
First grade will be, correct.
So they'll probably be shifting their lower grade certifications, K-2. They'll be shifting which grade they're in next year. Next couple years.
It may not be even, right? Like a lot of times in elementary school, they like to say, well, we're gonna have 4 kindergarten teachers, 4 first grade and 4 second grade. But to your point, it might be that we have 3 first grade and 5 kindergarten, right? Because we will need to shift based on enrollment. Ms. Thurman made a great point, and I wanna elevate it. I'm doing this on behalf of you, Ms. CFO, around that we cannot hold these positions harmless forever. That is right. I mean, our budget won't be able to absorb it forever. We will look at 20-day enrollment next year. We probably won't make changes, but that will be the first time that we say to principals, hey, this enrollment has not come back, and you need to start planning for 22, 23, what you're gonna do if we have to, you know, reduce headcount. Now, typically, that happens through attrition, right? Like, we let people post, you know, vacancies, and next year it may be, you don't get to post that vacancy because at the end of the year, we don't think you're gonna have enough kids to support that position. So we will make the shift because we can't carry this. It will bury us from a financial perspective.
It is something I bring up, I always just say, you know, so if the enrollment doesn't come, I mean, that's what you do. And I think, you know, again, there's enough turnover each year that it's not that we have to go do RIFs. It's really that you just say, you know, we just don't fill those positions. And, you know, Penny and I work really closely together, digging in the staffing model, working on position control, our new system that we've invested in, and will help us really, you know, see where those teachers are. And I think you had conversations with principals already kind of seeing, you know, if we did this is what it would have looked like if we had just, you know, followed the staffing model very strictly. So it's something we're very aware of, and looking at those opportunities.
Do we have any positions that we're funding that are not filled?
There's always some, yeah.
How
And-
many? Because it's always amazing to me how we can hire people and say, oh, it was in the budget. Maybe we didn't know it was in the budget. I want to know where those positions are in the budget.
Right.
And how much money is there that we're funding positions that people are not there.
Yeah, and that's what the position control does, and that is, what
Oh,
that
I
is,
know.
yeah.
I know it very well how
Yeah.
it works.
Yeah. But it's,
Just, like
and
I say, every time we hire somebody, we say, well, hold it, we
Yeah.
didn't know that. It's, oh, it was in the budget. Well,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
God only knows what's in this budget and these positions. Because it's like, you know, playing three-card money, you just don't ever know. You know, I just would like to know how many positions are funded that are not, we have not hired anyone.
Right, and I know we, you know, we,
The-
go ahead.
Well, I also want to make sure we're clear. Are you talking about the entire year, Rhonda?
I'm just talking about positions right here in this little white book
It's not a little.
that are funded.
Yeah.
We fund them, and there's nobody in those positions.
Oh.
Because when we hire somebody and they just say, well, it was in the budget, you approved it in the budget. You
I
vote for
do
the
think
budget, you approve it.
We do want to point out, we froze positions, so we definitely carried some vacancies.
Well, maybe they're still, well, because.
This whole year.
Some
But I
things
think to
happened
the-
last year that you said we approved it in the budget, and I thought those positions were gone, but obviously they weren't. So I just was wondering if there were any more of those positions there that.
I think the
were
positions are still the
positions.
4598, but I think to your point, we don't make visible vacancy, like we don't actually, you know, show a vacancy rate or put that in the budget as a line item. And I do think once we get new munis systems, we can be very clear on what are the vacancies and the vacancy rate. I keep looking at you, Penny, because I do know we've been holding a list of positions that we didn't fill this year, just making sure the economy.
Right,
Uh,
and Mary Ellen
help.
and I are working on making sure that we monitor those positions that we've held, and that we're very strategic in which positions we backfill and where, and ensuring based on the staffing model that the needs are there. And so I have a weekly call with exceptional ed and several other departments to ensure that we're staffing accordingly. And then, to Dr. Town's point with Munis, we're gonna be able to drill down deeper than we ever have. So in the past, you know, we've just had blanket job codes and not really certain of, you know, we have a 185 teacher. Well, now in Munis, we're gonna be able to see that that's a third grade teacher or that's a science teacher. So that's gonna help us have more insight.
Yeah.
I'm not so much worried about the teaching, well, I guess it could be some teaching positions in time at school positions, but I'd just like to know that number a bit closer than we've been able to see it in the past.
The other thing I also point out, just to give you some specifics around numbers, and we'll get this in count. 8th grade is up about 3%, and so just, you know, rough math, there's usually about 3,000 students per grade level, and so 3% of that number. 9th grade is up about 3%. 10th grade is up about 3%. 11th grade is up about 5%. 12th grade is down about 7%. And so there's a net gain there. High school, you know, is a little more difficult from a scheduling standpoint and subject specifics. And so what's needed in classes and courses. So again, that's kind of what's going on 8th through 11th anyway, and 12th.
Yeah. But I will say position control, I mean, I think that one of the things I bring is that it passed at the universities, and that was really a key, is looking at knowing exactly what we have funded. And, you know, sometimes you can use it as, you know, one-time funding of the vacancies, but really understanding exactly what your position, where they are. The old system really was not did not get information on that, so we're really excited to get in a new system where we can do that at any point in time, have a snapshot of that. And again, that's a lever that you can pull to say, well, we're just gonna hold back on, which we've done some this year, to know exactly what you've gone. And again, sometimes you are shifting, and especially in the schools that you may have at the title, I think that's where one of the big challenges is, because sometimes the principals do have the discretion of how they fill the position, and so sometimes that makes it hard to track that what was instructional coach and now it's this, and really doing that. So
I'm not talking about getting into
Yeah.
minutia like that. That's their deal.
And then the last one that we were going to point out was budget document 4, and again, that just kind of, again, summarizes the strategic priorities. So I'll shift it back to talk about the timeline.
So just, you have the timeline there, and obviously have me set with you. We're always open to ask any questions, that you have. I know y'all will pose them freely, and then we'll come back together April the 12th. And again, in addition to any questions about this, we also will have a 3-year plan, as well as areas that may have been strategic priorities that we were not able to fund. Then April 15th, proposed budget for your consideration. So that's proposed budget. Yes, and we do, I think it's mentioned a couple times, we've got individual meets with you all to answer any questions that you have around this budget. And I should raise this just as we go, as we look at the general purpose. I know we've talked about a lot about ESSER within here, within the general purpose budget. The things that you see are the 51 positions that we've held at the classroom level, plus adding the 8, doing another 1% plus the step, and then moving base pay to 13 and removing the 15-year cap, whereas we had folks that came from outside that may have 20 years of experience and, teachers, and we want to be able to be aggressive in really recruiting experienced teachers to our district as well. So
I'm sure you guys have read this as well, but obviously due to COVID, the number of people applying to schools to study education is strong.
Right.
And so we have to realize we're in an incredibly competitive environment for our teachers. And I think moving the needle ahead makes our district attractive for teachers. And so again, using as much as we can with it, but this will be a national concern. It already is, and it will just multiply in the years to come. So
I'm with the same thing.
And how does that change the conversation about what education looks like in the next decade? Because it's been going down. And what have we learned in Hamilton County about what works with remote, with online? I mean, it's an opportunity to be very creative, I think. In as much as we've all been forced to innovate and press into change that we would have probably held at arm's distance longer, without being forced to go remote.
it's a great point. Something we'll look at in regards, in particular, I think about AP dual enrollment courses where it's easier and more justifiable to pivot to remote, like we're looking in that realm already. Any other questions? Mr. Chairman?
No, I think that's it. We are adjourned.
Good job, Mr. Wingate.
It was tough.